welcome to the Conversational Hypnosis Academy. My name is Scott Jansen, and I want to formally welcome you aboard to our brand new training, which is to look at how to use Skype correctly for hypnosis to gain maximum results, grow your business, but also grow your authority as well. Now, before we get into the content of this training, we want to lay down a couple of ideas just to set the foundation of where this training is going to take us, what it's all about, and what your expectations should be, and your skill set by the end of this training. When we look at hypnosis as a whole, and for growing your business and also growing your authority, as we move in and through the 21st century, we should be all well aware that technology governs our life. And as a hypnotherapist, gone are the days of having to just see a client face to face. We can start to utilize technology either over Skype or over by mobile phone. This training will also suit to move into the century with technology, so we can start to do more things with hypnosis than previous. Now, to also add to this, we want to make sure that as we get through this training, that like any other training, you utilize these ideas and combine them with your current skill set. And this is super important. The skills, the ideas, the concepts, and the strategies we're going to lay down through this Skype hypnosis training is not the all and end all. This is not set in cement. This is not the way you need to do things. This is a type of training that you'll include in the way you're doing things now to grow your ability as you move through. So the content itself, we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about Skype as a whole and how you can use it to grow your business, but also navigate through a hypnosis session using Skype or a mobile phone. But to give you some ideas of the negatives, but also the positive and benefits to using Skype or a mobile phone with clients, and how that can help you ratify your business also. The sessions themselves, we have split up into three main parts. The first part we're going to look at in a moment is looking at session 1, which is more looking at what we call unconscious moments or hypnotic cues, because this is going to be super important as we start to use Skype for hypnosis, but also through our mobile phone. We need to understand how hypnosis is going to slightly differ than the classical or the normal, because we are using a different medium than face-to-face. Session 2 is probably the most important part, which is called the environmental setup. And essentially, this is how to correctly set up your client, but also set up the environment your client finds himself in, but also where you find yourself in when you're conducting the session. The last session is a unique opportunity to look at what actually happens once a client has finished with you, where the session has ceased and the results are there, what you can actually do for a client as far as suggesting to a client of how they can grow their results, but also get more from the session at hand. So let's look at the first session. As stated, we're going to look at something called unconscious moments. Now, if you're not familiar with the Conversational Hypnosis Academy style of hypnosis, if you are, you should be very familiar with spotting unconscious moments. But if you're not, let's lay down the foundation of what spotting unconscious moments is. The unconscious moment, or more classically known as a hypnotic cue, is your client's ability to show you, either through verbal implication or their mannerisms or the way they are physically, that trance is beginning. In the old classical terms, a hypnotic cue is where you can actually see or hear your client going into trance. Now, fundamentally, a hypnotist, when they do a thorough training, is introduced to this idea. They're introduced to the idea of looking for these unconscious moments or these hypnotic cues that lets the therapist know that they're on the right track and that hypnosis is occurring. What we want to do with this training is take a little bit further and show you what to do with these unconscious moments, but also how you need to navigate differently when different circumstances arrive, and also when you're using a different medium other than face-to-face. So essentially, the unconscious moment, just to give us a list so you can have in the back of your mind, is seeing, hearing, or noticing your client going into trance. Now, this could be classically like a rapid eye blinking, deeper breathing, shallower breathing. It could be a confusion, the inability to speak, the inability to logically think out scenarios or to answer the questions from the hypnotist. It could be automatic movement. It could be total eye closure. It could be total inability to move, speak, or even do anything because the trance is so deep. So we know something about unconscious moments. We know that by seeing them, it should be a good indication that the therapy or the style of hypnosis or even the induction that you're using is on the right track. Meaning that as a hypnotist, this is the perfect clue without assuming that everything is going towards a result, which is either going to be trance or more therapeutic. Now, when it comes to using a face-to-face situation with a client, we have every opportunity to see these unconscious moments more clearly, to utilize them more clearly because the context and the scenario is different. But when it comes to using Skype, there's a couple of options and a couple of things we need to make apparent that you might have to adjust your own way of doing things and dealing with these unconscious moments. When it comes to Skype, there are two ways that you're going to be setting up your session. Let's look at the first one. With Skype, we have the opportunity to have the camera on. Now, the positives and negatives which we'll go through that work for you as the hypnotist, but you also need to consider in regards to the way you're treating your client as well. When the camera is on, there are a couple of things we can utilize in regards to spotting unconscious moments, but also we have to our advantage. Firstly, and the most obvious, is we can actually see our client. Now with Skype as well, you can actually have the opportunity to actually see your client but them not see you, or you can have the camera on for you and your client to be able to see you as well. The positives is you can see all the unconscious moments. And you're probably going to be more comfortable through your own associations, especially if you're seeing clients face-to-face, that it may feel like the hypnosis session is more natural because you do have the visual clues, but it makes more sense to your client to be able to see you as well. So comfort on both sides is definitely equal to that point. The negative to having a camera on, these are just ideas to keep in the back of our mind, is probably the most profound right here, would be that once your client goes into trance, all it takes is for your client to be wondering, can my therapist see me the whole time? Or am I going to do something silly on camera if my therapist is looking at me? And to reiterate this as well, the last thing your client wants to see as they come out of trance, which is normally peaceful, relaxing, therapeutic, and any of the above, the normal hypnotic cues we know about, is us as a hypnotist sitting there staring and waiting for our client to come out. And this could be a little bit intimidating, especially if your client comes out of a deep therapeutic trance and maybe come out a little bit confused and maybe wondered, what on earth just happened. For us as the hypnotist to be staring directly into the camera could be a little bit intimidating and could cause a little shock as well. So we need to keep that in mind. It does have its positives and it also has the negatives. The next part is with the camera off. Now, the reason we've actually formed this training together is being a training academy. The questions we get asked a lot is, can I use Skype utmost? But the second part is, do I have to have the camera on? And what do I need to do if the camera's not on? Can I still use Skype? And the answer is absolutely yes. The only thing a hypnotist needs to do, and just like any technique they're learning, any language pattern they're learning, is to be flexible and to adjust their approach according to the context they find themselves in. And the context here is the camera's going to be off while using Skype. So we just need to think, if we cannot see the unconscious moments, we can't see the automatic movement, we can't see the relaxation of the shoulders or the relaxation of the facial muscles or the posture, we cannot see the rapid eye blinking, we can't even see if a client's eyes are actually closed. We need to put in a couple of extra things that help us know exactly what's going on without actually seeing our client. And speaking from experience, when I was seeing clients, 9 times out of 10, I would actually offer my clients if they wanted the camera on or off. And 9 times out of 10, my client would always want the camera off. So we had to put together something that I could put in place to make myself feel more comfortable that still made the session a profound experience for the therapeutic result that I was after. So with the camera off, what do we need to do different? The positive is there's no intimidation. And the great thing about this as well is your client's going to feel more relaxed, but you can also feel more relaxed as the hypnotist. You don't have to be as formal. You still have to be ethical and professional, absolutely. But it gives you more time to relax in a circumstance where you find yourself more at home, where you don't have to worry about your client judging you, but also the client doesn't have to worry about you judging them through a Skype medium. So there's no intimidation at that point. You'll find that you're more relaxed in the session because there's not as much pressure on you because you're only speaking now. You're not actually, have the visual and the auditory cues, which is great for you and your client. The negative side is you cannot see the unconscious moments. But there's one great thing about unconscious moments. When you take out their ability to see them, all we need to do is adjust our context accordingly. We need to start to listen more. We need to start getting more feedback, and we also need to slow down. And these are the 3 keys I want to extend now. When we're listening for an unconscious moment, it's going to be vastly different than seeing it. Seeing is all your visual clues. We need to think of what do we need to listen out for more that could still tell us that an unconscious moment is going on. And we know the reason we're actually listening and noticing these unconscious moments is because if the unconscious moments are not happening, this tells us that trance is not happening. It tells us that our technique is not working. It tells us our approach is either hit or miss. The unconscious moment is a clear expression from a client's unconscious or subconscious mind that what we're doing right now is perfect and to keep on doing it. So if we're listening more, what things do we need to listen out for? Well, the most obvious things are signs of confusion. Now, signs of confusion can come through a simple statement like so. You'll be conversing with your client and then they start to and ah things. Or it takes them a while to be able to answer your question. Another clue that lets you know that confusion is taking hold, and one of the most obvious, I believe, is when a client explains an answer to you and then also responds with, does that make sense to you? Now, what this is telling you is that it probably doesn't make sense to the client, and now they're asking for justification from you if it makes sense too. Now, without going into the details, or you can actually use that for an induction, or how can we use that as an unconscious moment, just take it as face value that some sort of confusion is going on. Now, why is confusion going on? Well, we know once we get rid of the conscious mind, logic has no place. It means that what logic was there before and a reasoning process was there before is somehow diminished, and it's very hard to come up with a linear answer when the unconscious mind is in its full extent. We know the unconscious mind is more creative. We know it communicates more through symbols or sensations, but also associations. We have to make sure that as we're hearing these unconscious moments, that we almost tick the box that trance is beginning. We don't just have to see it, we can hear it. But also as well, if we look back onto when the camera's on, not only are you going to see these unconscious moments, but you might also hear them as well. You're going to see maybe the rapid eye blinking or the postural changes, but you're also going to hear the confusion. You're going to hear the lack of understanding, and you're going to hear when logic has no reasoning process left. And this is a great thing for us as hypnotists. So we just need to listen out more. We're also going to hear not only the umming, ahhing, and also the pausing. As human beings, we tend to make what I call thinking sounds, meaning that as your client thinks about something, they might click their tongue, or they might tap the table, or they might do something that lets you know they're in a deeper sign of thinking. You can hear these little, what we call hypnotic insights occurring, where a client's using a mannerism to help them think. This is another version of an unconscious moment. Okay, we all have them, and it's interesting to think about yourself when you've actually been thinking about something deep, or if you find yourself in that situation, what do you actually do to help the process of thinking? So that's just to keep in the back of your mind. The next part is looking at feedback. Now, feedback is very, very important. Now, we're going to take this feedback and extend it through your whole hypnosis career. This is not just for Skype, or this is a Skype training. This should be something that all hypnotists should be using inside their interactions and also their interventions. What is feedback? Feedback is essentially finding out what is occurring and how a client is feeling at that very moment. The more classical hypnosis is where we talk at a client, we use language patterns, or we read a script, or we tell a story that we hope hits an association and puts a client into trance by what we're saying. Now, we know this is not always the case. We know as hypnotists we're not always going to write. We're not always going to get the right language pattern out. We're not always going to know which story to tell. We're not always going to know which induction is best. So ideally, when we're getting feedback, is we're going to try our hypnotic technique, and then we're going to ask a client, what was the result of the technique I used? So it might be something as simple as, how do you feel right now? What is occurring inside your mind right now? What are you thinking about? How does your body feel? What we're doing at this point is asking our client to give us clues about what is occurring in their reality as a result of the induction I've just used, or the story I've just told, or the language pattern I'm using at that point. Now, this hypnotic feedback is also important for the hypnotist, who finds himself getting a little bit confused or wondering, what do I do now? Or what am I supposed to do with this or that? Or I can see an unconscious moment. What do I do with it? The best thing you can do at this point is ask for that feedback. And especially when we're using Skype, when the camera's off, you'll probably find yourself asking for more feedback more often because we don't have those visual clues. So let me give you a scenario. Let's say our client is sitting in front of us over Skype, camera's off, everything else is set up perfectly, and we'll move on to the setup very soon. And it's for example, a smoking session. And we've asked a couple of questions, we've investigated the stop smoking mindset, and then we ask some question that seems to embody a little bit more thinking. And we can hear our client umming and ahhing, we can hear our client maybe making those thinking noises, we can hear that our client really can't answer the question logically. And what we're going to do at this point is almost catch them in this thinking moment, inside this unconscious moment, and ask them, what's occurring right now? What are you feeling? What are you thinking about? And what this is doing, it's basically embodying the utilization principle, which we're all pretty familiar with. But what it's letting me know is I can't see you. All I can do is hear. You need to tell me what is going on because I have no idea what to do next, as an example, as the therapist. And the result and the answer you get from getting that feedback lets you know the next step. And being that the camera's off, we're going to have to do this multiple times. Now you may be thinking, well, this a lot of me ask, what if my client keeps asking me, why do you keep asking me what's happening? What am I thinking about? We just need to let them know up front, hey, I have to tailor this session to you. If I can't see you, I maybe have to ask for more feedback during the session, but it'll actually help the trance itself. The next part is we need to slow down. Now this is the cross the board as well. All too often we hear hypnotists rushing their processes, rushing their induction, rushing their stories, rushing their language patterns. We need to understand one thing about the human mind, is it does take time to absorb the very strategies you're using. It does take time to absorb the very processes you're putting into place. It takes time to absorb the story. It takes time for the language pattern to create the pattern to put in trance. It takes time for the TBS to catch up for our client. We need to understand that we have to give the mind that subtle minute of thinking or so that our client can process what we want. There's no point chucking everything we have at them and hoping it'll stick. What we need to do is try a little bit, get some feedback, but also allow what we've just tried to settle in and allow our client to process what we're talking about or the language pattern we're using in order for it to have its full effect. And again, to reiterate, now the camera's off, we need to slow down even more because we're not seeing those clues. So with the camera on, just to recap, we can see the unconscious moments. You're going to feel more comfortable as a hypnotist because it's a closer version of seeing a face-to-face client. But the negative is that intimidation factor. With the camera off, the positive, you don't have that intimidation factor. You're going to feel more comfortable, and so is your client, in regards to the environment they're in, but we just can't see those unconscious moments. So we might be thinking, well, how do I know what is best for my client? How do I know if they are more suited to an off-camera Skype or on-camera? Well, the easiest way to do it is ask your client what they prefer. Let them know up front that the choice is up to them, that they can have the camera on or they can have the camera off. Now, the setup in session 2, but also the sleep integration we'll look at in session 3, really doesn't matter whether you have the camera on or off. Essentially, we're going to set up the session perfectly so it suits camera on and off, and the sleep integrations once the session's done, so it really doesn't matter at that point. All the good work, so to speak, has been done. So let's recap just quickly again. Camera on or camera off. Ask your client what is best for them. Now, the reason this is important because we want to take out our own assumptions that I think as a hypnotist, you'd be better with the camera on or you'd be better with the camera off. Ask your client, and what this is doing is starting to let them know that you're in complete rapport with them, that you're there to look after them, and it lets them know that they have some control over the session as well. And this is super important for us as hypnotists. Just laying down a simple question like this is including our clients in the session and lets them know that I want to tailor suit this session to you. Now, if you think of everything we talked about with the camera off, this could suit to a mobile phone. You really need to listen out for those unconscious moments. Are you hearing the confusion? Are you hearing the lack of logic? Are you hearing the deeper thinking of answers and questions? These are the things you just need to take care of in yourself and pay more attention to. Now, as the hypnotist, it is not a bad idea to get yourself a set of headphones and to get yourself a good quality microphone. Because if you are telling a story or you are going to a long language pattern, whatever style you use, you want to make sure that your client can hear you. And in addition to this, letting your clients know that, hey, put a set of headphones so you can hear me clearer. Or get a microphone so when we do talk with each other, there's no interruption. There's nothing that we're missing because everything you say to me is important and everything I say to you is equally important. You need to hear me. So you just have to lay down this foundation. Now, you might already be thinking, well, this is pretty obvious. I already do this. What seems obvious is always the things that get missed. Now, it's obvious when I started as a hypnotist many, many years ago, but a lot of the times I hadn't set up the session properly. So regardless of whether I had the camera on or off, the session was a little bit pear-shaped here and there, which is why I had to start to think of, well, if the camera's on or off or I have a mobile phone, what do I need to do to the session to set it up correctly so either circumstance and context works in my favor? So that's session 1 done, and it's setting up the basics. We haven't really started the session yet. All we've done is start to look at how do we control the camera, how do we listen to these unconscious moments. So with that behind us now, let's move into session 2. Now this is where we start to play with our hypnotic wizardry, if you will. Session 2 is asking for or setting up what is called the environmental setup. Now, for those who have done our training before with the Conversational Hypnosis Academy, with myself, Scott Jansen, we were very aware on how we set up a session in regards to safety, set up a session in regards to fun, excited places, learning, etc. This setup we're going to do now embodies this, and it may be just an extra addition you add onto that. For people that have not done this version of conversational hypnotherapy before, or that model where you use a proper setup to set up the unconscious mind for trance, essentially the setup we're using right now is for you as the hypnotist to almost see exactly what is occurring inside your client's environment. Okay, now camera on or off, I would still use this as a professional hypnotist just to make sure I was on the right track. So what I mean by environmental setup, as a hypnotist, we know it is super important to never assume anything. We know it's important not to assume anything about a client's problem. We know it's important not to assume anything about how they're going to resolve their issue. And we also equally know we should never assume what is the best scenario for my client to overcome their issue, their fear, or their addiction. Meaning that we have to negate ourselves from giving advice, and we have to just find out if we're setting up the environmental setup as a hypnotist to make sure we're not assuming anything about the location of my client. Think about it for yourself. If the camera's off, we need to find out what exactly our client's doing at the very start of a session. And this is where the environment comes in handy. And for example, we may need to find out, are they sitting? Are they standing? Are they laying down in bed? Are they in an office chair? Are they in an office? Are they in a quiet environment? Are their hands on the desk? Are their arms on the desk? Are they holding a mobile phone? Do they have a headset on? Any of these sorts of things may seem very trivial at the start, but we know we can use them later. We'll talk about that very soon. Knowing what's in my client's environment allows me to associate the session and connect with the session accordingly. It means I'm not taking any wild guesses and I'm not taking any assumptions. Let me give you an example of how this could play out in wrong terms. Let's say I'm going through more of an Ericksonian approach where I may be using overload of language patterns. I'm starting to stack realities and language patterns in order for my client to go into a very peaceful and pleasant trance. I may use language patterns like, the more you lay down, the more you're going to feel relaxed, because just by being relaxed means you can lay down and start to breathe more deeply. So right there, I've used the idea that my client is laying down. Now, if I get this wrong and my client is seated, what have I done? Well, I've rejected their very reality and added my own, and I have not connected to the right environment they find themselves in, and there becomes a disconnect. Meaning that the first couple of things that I've said to my client, which is lay down, you can feel relaxed, you can lay there and feel and breathe more deeply, won't connect and probably won't have the force I need them for and need them to have to put my client into trance. I have to make sure that if my client's seated, I know about it. I have to make sure if my client's leaning back on their chair, I want to know about it. If my client is using a mobile phone, I want to know about it. And the best way to start the session to find out the setup is, as we said before, is to ask our client. And it may sound like this. So, Joe Blogs, before we get into the session, as you're aware, I cannot see you over Skype, you cannot see me. So before we get into the session, I just want to ask you a couple of questions about what you're doing right now. Are you seated right now? And Joe Blog says, yes, I'm sitting on a stool. Excellent, thank you. Are your feet touching the ground? No, they're actually on the little bar just above the ground. Okay, excellent. Are you holding a mobile phone or are you doing this via your laptop? Well, I'm actually using a microphone in front of me and I'm on a home desktop. So right now, I have 3 things inside of the environment that Joe finds himself in. And this reality Joe finds himself in is important, is because it's what he knows and it's what he can agree with. If I go through my process, if you use scripts, or I jump into a story that I'm using, and it's all about Joe laying down, it's all about Joe's feet touching the ground, and it's all about Joe holding a mobile phone up to his ear, I've got 3 disconnects. And very likely, the conscious mind of Joe is going to be at full alert, but also the unconscious mind is not going to be able to connect to what I'm trying to set up. So if your camera's off, that gives you a perfect opportunity to write a couple of things down just to keep in the back of your mind. Write down if your client or Joe Blogs is sitting up. Write if they're laying down. Write it down if they're using a mobile phone or using a headset. We need to know what is happening inside Joe's environment at all times. So that's part 1 of setting up the environmental setup. Now, we want to make it clear, if we do find our clients, just for safety, just as a side note, that if you do find your client wants to stand during the session, we do need to suggest that they sit down. If your client is laying down, we may need to suggest for them to stand up. Now, trance has its associations, and it can work in this way, where clients feel like they need to lay down. And sometimes a therapist has been taught to lay a client down, and it's all fine. The only association we have as human beings with laying down is sleep. Now, I don't want to get into the argument of whether hypnosis and sleep can work together or a client can overcome major issues if they fall asleep or those sorts of things, because that's a training in itself, and that just comes through concepts, ideas, and different styles of hypnosis. What I want to do is take away all the associations, but I want to include safety. So I'm going to let Joe know, can you please sit down for the session? And ask him, what type of chair are you sitting in? Is it a stool? Is it an office chair? Is it a recliner if you're sitting on a couch? I want to find out these things so I can connect with the language pattern or even the story that I'm about to tell or the induction I'm about to use. If Joe's holding a mobile phone, you might want to ask him, can he put a set of headphones in and lay the phone down and just put it on speaker? Now, this is important because sometimes our clients may find themselves going into a style of trance where holding their hand up to their face might get a little bit more lethargic and a little bit more harder at that point. And I don't want Joe to drop the phone because he is so relaxed or so peaceful during the sessions, because then I can't hear Joe and he can't hear me, which means I can't take care of him. So these are just little adjustments that you need to keep in the back of your mind. And again, you do this part to your own ability and what you've been told, but these are just subtle suggestions to keep in the back of your mind to make things easier for you. So to recap everything, we have to make sure that the environment our client is in, it's almost like we're there with them. Get them to paint you a picture. We know that if a client's sitting down, they're going to feel certain sensations in their body other than standing up, and we know we can use this. If a client is holding a phone up to their face instead of using a microphone where they're sort of leaning forward into it and leaning on a desk to talk through a microphone, we know we can use this. I almost, to the extent, want to be able to see what is happening inside my client's environment because I don't have the camera on, and I need to know because it's these knowings that I have that I know I can use as a part of trance later. Now, even if my client's camera is on, I might still ask them as a part of the induction, but also to get the conversation going. I might ask them, do you feel comfortable sitting in that chair? Or are your feet touching the ground? Which one of your arms is leaning more heavily on the desk? Whatever the case may be. Now, this is important because I've started the conversation and I'm drawing their attention to something. And we know why attention is so important for trance. We know that if we have clear and very present attention, that trance has fuel to grow and ratify. So it's super important we have that set up. We also want to make sure as well, just as a side note, is that even before the session begins, we have to make it crystal clear to our clients that wherever they're taking the session, it needs to be somewhere quiet. It has to be a place where they're not going to be disturbed. It has to be a place where you don't want the kids running through or people knocking on the door or having the TV on in the background or having the phone ring halfway through or maybe a mobile phone ring halfway through the session. But also we don't want dogs and cats running around. We need our client to be in a very tranquil place, not for the sake of the trance, but it's more for the sake that I don't want them to get distracted. I want to make sure I have all of their attention throughout the whole entire intervention. So that's your client's environmental setup. For yourself as a hypnotist, there's a couple of things we need to take care of as well. We need to think about your environment. As a hypnotist with the camera off, you have to make sure that you're in a place that you can conduct yourself professionally and where the noise is completely silent. The last thing you want to be doing as a hypnotist is doing a session at a busy cafe, or you want to be doing a session at someone's house where they're watching TV in the background. You have to be in the exact right environment that would induce a trance for you if the session was being done for you. So put this protocol into place. Think about it. If you're doing a lot of talking, you may have to need some water. You may need tissues just in case your own stuff starts to come up during the session, that if you do find yourself a little bit emotional because you're connecting emotionally with your client, that you have these things put in place. Have the water in place, have the tissues ready, even have a snack ready in case you have a long 2, 3, maybe 4 hour session, so you're not getting up and down out of your seat. You have to be present the whole time, just like your client. So you're almost sort of mirroring the circumstance you want your client in. You need to be doing the same for yourself. The next part for us as a hypnotist is your own distraction. Now, the one we could have added this before as a negative with the camera on is if you find with the camera on, you're getting distracted by what's in your client's environment, you need to take care of this yourself. If you see that they have a bright colored picture behind them and you find your focus, especially when the session is underway and you're starting to feel more in trance, you don't want your attention to be focused on this bright, loud painting behind them. So you may need to let them know, hey, do you mind if I turn the camera off my side because it's a little bit distracting? I want to make sure I give you my full attention. And again, this may seem obvious, but these are little things to add to the way you use Skype and the way you conduct yourself professionally as a hypnotist. So that's the environmental setup. You just need to think, if I can't see my client, what type of environment are they in? What's happening in their reality right now? Where are they? Are they sitting? Are they standing? Are they kneeling? Are they laying down? Are their feet on the floor? Are they resting on something? Are they holding something? These are things that let you know exactly what's happening in your session. And it's the exact same things you would see if your client was seeing you face to face. You want to make them as appropriate to each other as possible and never assume that your client is standing when they're seated, they're laying down when they're standing up again. You have to make sure you know what's occurring at all times. So that's session 2 done, the environmental setup. The last part, which I think is the most important to a client, but also for their safety, but also for the ratification of the session, but also for your well-being as well and your mindset, is the sleep integration. Now, there is something that we all do as human beings while we sleep. We integrate experiences, we integrate new lessons of the day, and this is done through symbolism and what we know of as dreams. Meaning that when we go to sleep at night, the unconscious mind is busy reconnecting new thoughts, maybe new things you've experienced during the day, and making sense of them. That's what the unconscious mind is doing. We know that when we put a client into trance, this same process of integration of new thoughts and new ideas and new connections are being done in that trance experience. And we know this is done while a client is having an unconscious moment, okay, which is why we tend to find if a client is in an unconscious moment, they will stay in there for as long a period as they need to while the unconscious mind is integrating everything that's occurring from the session at hand. So with that aside, sleep integration for our client. The great thing, and I think one of the biggest benefits to using a mobile phone or Skype, is the very fact that once the session is done, you can ask your client or hint to your client to go have a nap once the session is done. If you've ever been in trance, and as a therapist, I could assume that you would have at least once or twice, we know that trance can get very tiring. It's like a workout for the brain, if you will. We know if we go to the gym and we work out, our body gets very tired, it needs to relax, it needs to recuperate. And we know the mind can have this. We know that once we get past our mental energy for the day, it comes to a point where we can't even function properly because we need sleep, and that's all we think about. The great thing about sleep integration after a hypnosis session is that once the client has come out of trance, we know there is a possibility that the conscious mind of the client can interfere with the processes being done by the unconscious mind. And if you've seen enough client, you've heard when your clients tell you about this, and it sounds like this. Your client may state that for a couple of hours after the session, they felt a bit like a zombie. They're a little bit zonked out, a little bit zoned out. They couldn't quite think clearly. What's happening here is the unconscious mind, especially after a session, is doing its most important work. I'm not sure for people listening at home if you realize that when a client leaves your session, leaves your office and goes into the real world, that all the most important work is being done. And you'll find that if your client comes out of a session, maybe a non-smoker, all the new connections, all the new learnings, everything that they've taken from the session actually gets filtered through and reconnected while a client sleeps. So when they go to bed at night time for 8 or 9 hours, they come out, it's almost like they've been in a hypnosis session for 8 or 9 hours, and all those new things that need to be connected have been done while a client's sleeping. So if a client comes out of trance, they're going to be feeling a little bit tired. They're going to be feeling a little bit zonked out for the day. So what a great opportunity for us as a hypnotist to tell our client that once the session's done, they should go have a nap. And you can use this as part of your demarcation, or you can use this as part of your ending session routine. You can let a client know, and you can use suggestions here, which is great for the unconscious mind, that now the session is done, the best thing for you to do is go have a sleep. Because it's while you're sleeping that your unconscious mind can start to reconnect the new you with all your new learning so you become a better person. The great thing about sleep also, it allows your unconscious mind total freedom to do what it does best and help you not only just get through this issue, but help you become a better person all round. So that might be a little spiel, a little monologue I would actually tell my formal clients, which lets them know, hey, if I get a good sleep or I have a nap here, not only am I going to feel recovered and rested, that my unconscious mind is going to be hard at work. And your client's unconscious mind takes that as a suggestion, and you're basically telling the unconscious mind of your client, hey, if this client sleeps, can you get to work? Can you speed things along, and can you make sure all the most important stuff is done while they sleep? This sleep integration or integration of processes is super important, not just for your Skype clients, not just for your mobile phone clients, it's also for your face-to-face clients. Anytime your client leaves from seeing you as an appointment, let them know that sleep is the best thing they could do. This sleep integration is a natural part of what we do as human beings, and it is super important for us as hypnotists, so we need to let our clients know. Let them know that if they go to sleep, the integration process that's been happening throughout the trance will continue, but in a more powerful way while they sleep. And you'll find that if your clients do go to sleep, and maybe you need to ask them, to give me a call afterwards or send me a quick text message, let me know how you're feeling, they will feel on top of the world. Because those two ideas of the total body resting, but also the integration process, have come together to give your client a full experience. Another addition to Skype and that sleep integration, for the client's well-being, but also for the hypnotist's well-being, is to understand that sometimes when a client leaves our office, although they'll still be in a very capable way to drive, it's a lot more safer for them just to turn off Skype, shut down the microphone, and go into another room and go have a sleep. They don't have to worry about driving. They don't have to worry about finding their way back home on unfamiliar ways. Maybe if your client's coming to see you in a different suburb than where they live, they don't have to worry about processing the long drive home, where things can happen along the way. So as far as safety, if your client's umming and ahhing about actually using Skype as part of the medium for the interaction you're going to have, let them know about the safety factor. Let them know that the sleep integration can happen automatically, and it's in their benefit, and they'll get more from the session that way. So that's just a side note of the positives of using Skype for your interaction. So there we have it. Now, it may not seem like much, but we also know the most obvious things we can do as a hypnotist aren't always the ones we put in place. We have to ask our clients first off, would they like the camera on? Would they like the camera off? We have to understand the positives and the negatives about the camera on, but also of the camera off. We need to understand how the unconscious moments will seem different if we cannot see them. We need to set up the session perfectly, And to reiterate, this is not to take away the setup of setting up for safety, for fun experiences and learning experience, etc. This is to actually set up before you even start all that, before you even do your little pre-take talk or before you do your investigation of the problem. You want to make sure you know what's happening inside your client's environment at all times, as if you can see them, as if you're face-to-face with them. That's as clear as I want to be. I don't want to assume anything, and I don't want to not connect with their experience because I haven't asked the questions beforehand. And the last part is get that sleep integration. Make that a part of your closing statement with clients. Let them know of the positives and the benefits of sleeping directly after a session. So there we have it, folks. That is our correct setup for using Skype for hypnosis, but also mobile phone. Now, it may not seem like much, but you might also be thinking, well, where are the techniques? Where are the strategies? How do I do the trance stuff? If you do this well enough, and I cannot state this loud enough, if you correctly set up the session, you correctly set up the environment, but also let your client know about the sleep integration, it does not matter what technique you use. It seems to be something in the industry where therapists and evolving hypnotists get sucked into the greatest technique for Skype, or this is the one technique for the mobile phone, or this is the one technique to use with the camera on or off. We have to understand these do not exist. Doesn't matter what technique you use, all technique you use and all methods can be used for any situation. It's how you set up the session and set up the session accordingly to suit your strategies and technique is what makes those techniques and strategies work in the first place. So I hope you took a lot away from this. I hope you enjoyed this to add to the way you're doing things right now. That is all. I really do hope you enjoyed it, and I do thank you so much for joining us in this small training. Again, this is how to use Skype correctly for hypnosis. To get in contact with us, you can email us at info@conversationalhypnosisacademy.com or visit our website at www.conversationalhypnosis.com. Again, my name is Scott Jansen. I'm very pleased you got to join us for this short training, and we hope to see you on the next one. Goodbye for now.